This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. I want to take a moment to tell you about a podcast from the Shalom Hartman Institute called Identity Crisis. This podcast is creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. It's hosted by Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, who sits down with a wide range of guests, politicians, authors, writers, and more to discuss current events, Jewish values, and the big questions facing Jewish life. This podcast has a genuine curiosity and humility about the critical and complex issues, everything from what it means to be a Jewish leader during this divisive moment to the experience of being a Palestinian in Israel today. You will find Identity Crisis enriching and enlivening. Check it out, Identity/Crisis with Yehuda Kurtzer, wherever you get your podcasts. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, June 1913, heavyweight champion boxer Jack Johnson is sentenced under the Mann Act for violations. It is a case that is largely understood to be about backlash to Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, who not only defeated white boxers along the way, but did so with swagger and bravado. And that, folks, did not go over very well, was not taken too kindly in the 19-teens by the white establishment. This is also an era of prohibition and moral codes and the rise of the Mann Act, which was intended to prevent prostitution and sexual slavery, but was often used to go after black men for dating white women, which is exactly what happened in the case of Jack Johnson, who had a number of white girlfriends. So let's talk about the rise and fall of Jack Johnson, the miscegination fears of the era, not to mention the fears of black athletes surpassing white athletes. Here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Let me give a little background on who Jack Johnson was. Let's get to know him a little bit. He was the first black world heavyweight boxing champion. His title was 1908 to 1915. He was born, his parents were enslaved. He was born in 1878 in Galveston, Texas. Very poor, though a largely integrated neighborhoods. He talked about how growing up, a lot of his friends were white and, how he got along with their parents and ate at the table. And, he said, no one ever taught me that white men were superior to me. He starts his boxing career in the early 1900s, and then he has this victory in 1908 over Canadian Tommy Burns, actually fought in Australia. Burns had kind of spent 2 years taunting him, often with racial overtones. And this is in an era where there is real anxiety and fear, and boxing is a huge kind of sport in this moment. Mm-hmm. And I think just viscerally pits a lot of these fears because it is two opponents going into the ring. And so this is the era of people looking for the quote great white hope and genuine fear about black boxers overtaking white boxers.
It's so tied up with empire and with these concerns that men are becoming too soft, and boxing is sort of the place where men prove that they're men, but also it's kind of it's often seen as a civilizational battle. Teddy Roosevelt was a huge advocate of boxing and this kind of these displays of manliness, and to have a black man win one of these bouts, it set off anxieties about more than just white masculinity, but what's the future of white Western society?
Yeah, that's so perfect. I remember talking about that in graduate school too, during the orals. All of the early 20th century is about real deep struggles with masculinity, especially when women become when they get the vote, when they become more liberated. It's men don't know what to do with themselves, but often these things don't just become about gender; they become about race very quickly. And so race plays a big part in that. And and we say this a lot in Black culture, where it's you're rooting for everyone Black, the Issa Rae that popularized. But it's the idea that when Jack Johnson fights too, he's not just fighting as himself. He is fighting for the entire race. He's representing everyone in that space. And so when he wins, it's like Black people win. And when he loses, it's like Black people are losing. And so the stakes are incredibly high for these. These aren't just your ordinary, fights.
There's a fight in 1910 against James Jeffries that at the time was dubbed the fight of the century. Let me just do my
lots of those.
My usual quibble about every boxing match can't be the fight of the century, folks. I'm sorry. No. This is 1910, so maybe at that point, 10 years in, it really was. But James Jeffries, who is white, goes up against Jack Johnson. 20,000 people watch it. It's in downtown Reno, Nevada. And Jeffries says, I'm going into this fight for the sole purpose of proving that a white man is better than a Negro. And so, we
talk about fighting.
How'd it turn out, Jody?
Well, it turned out that he lost. And Johnson defeats Jeffries. Race riots break out across the United States on the news of this. 20 people are killed in violence. Houston, New York. It's a massive, massive moment.
This is so fascinating, I think, especially as historians, because first of all, everyone just says it at the time, which is kind of nice. It's like, this is about the white man beating the black man.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Put it down on paper. Can make it analyze that.
Yeah.
But the idea that there are deadly anti-black riots that take place across the country after Johnson wins, man, people were ate up at the time about this fight, because that symbolism that Jeffries talks about is something that a lot of white people across the United States have really become deeply invested in.
Yeah, internalized.
So much so, that 20 people are killed.
Yeah, that to me is just
astonishing.
That and the fact that this is filmed, and this film, for better words, it goes viral. I mean, it is like a blockbuster. It gets more public attention than any other film to date for the next 5 years. And I'm wondering, too, are people watching this fight and cheering? Are they rage watching? You know what I mean? Like, how is the film being circulated? But it shows you that it stays in the public memory and imagination.
A little bit to that point, and a very kind of both naive and very complicated question that I have for you, which is, in terms of what are people's emotions as they're watching this, and why are so many racial anxieties tied up into these fights? I mean, again, this is naive, but if an argument is that the black race is brutish and violent and inferior, why then the anxiety over the fact that the two men go into a ring and pummel each other and the black guy might win? Why is that seen as, undermining that? And I know that it's much more complicated than that, but, there is a sort of paradox in there for me.
Yes, the irony.
The fetishization of violence among black people.
Yes.
And then in this particular context, it totally gets twisted.
Yeah. I think there is something about this particular moment in world history when the conversations about empire and violence and strength are so prominent. And there's this real anxiety among empires that they are weak and effeminate and that they're really not strong enough. And if that hadn't been the central anxiety, I think it could have been recoded as, well, of course, black men are closer to animals, and so they have this brute strength, and white men shouldn't even be fighting them. But that's kind of not where they were.
I think boxing and violence in this moment has a kind of civilizing role as well. It's not seen as pure violence or brutishness.
Right. It's civilized violence. Right. It's contained.
Orchestrated.
But anyway, Ken Burns did a film about Johnson in 2005, and he said, for more than 13 years, Jack Johnson was the most famous and most notorious African American on earth. And Kellie, I mean, you read about. Let's talk about a little bit about his persona and how he embraces that fame. But I mean, he really plays it up.
He does. I mean, he is not someone who just sort of takes his medal and goes home. No. He is, the ultimate sort of hype man. He lives up to the bravado. He's known for wearing expensive tailored clothing, expensive jewelry, furs, not just for himself, but for his wives as well. He's got these fast automobiles. He likes to drive really fast. There's a story about him that I just find you could not tell that story today. We're he is racing in his car. He gets a speeding ticket. The police pull him over and give him a $50 speeding ticket. and he gives the police officer $100 bill. And when the police officer is like, yeah, I can't break change for this, Johnson's like, don't worry about it. Use it for my return trip. Like, basically, he plans on coming back there again and still, racing his car as fast as he possibly could. So there's a lot of bravado, arrogance, swag, charisma, as you would say.
And womanizing.
And that gets him into trouble. And womanizing. And that's what always follows. The womanizing, I'm reading the prep for this, and I can't stop thinking about Shannon Sharp and all these athletes that get into similar entanglements and terrible decisions. So part of this is that Jack Johnson is not just this major celebrity who thinks he can do whatever he wants, but he thinks that he can cross a line that is never meant to be crossed, which is the racial line of miscegination, that he can date white women, marry white women, have these relationships with white women, consensual or otherwise, and it sets the white populace off. They cannot handle his gallivanting, but they certainly can't handle his gallivanting with a white woman on his arm. And that's North or South. People are outraged at his unapologetic way of performing his power and masculinity. And part of that is having a white girl.
Yeah.
And so, this also has backlash in the Black community too. Like Booker T. Washington is basically it's unfortunate that you've got all this money and all this influence and you're not using it to improve the conditions of the race. At that time, especially in the 1910s and teens, you were meant to be a race man or a race woman. That was the person that uplifted the race. You were meant to sort of, how are you going to improve the conditions for society around you? Now, it's kind of rich coming from Booker T. Washington, who's got his own entanglements with white philanthropists. But when we think about how this plays out for Jack Johnson, it does not bode well, especially when it comes down to the white girlfriends.
Yeah. I've got some great news from one of our fellow Radiotopia shows. Ear Hustle, the show about daily life inside prison, is wrapping up an incredible season that took us from the true crime story of a bank robber named Sparkplug to the do's and don'ts of getting your haircut in prison. But Ear Hustle is not resting on their laurels. They are now gearing up for something new and exciting, an all-new 11-city tour. You can join hosts Nigel and Erlon along with special guests and performers. They're kicking off things in Nashville on August 4th. They're hitting Atlanta, Durham, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati, 11 different cities, wrapping up in Austin on August 21st. I have seen the Ear Hustle team in action during a live show before. It is a really special, joyous, interactive occasion. And check this out. If you are a This Day fan and you're going to a live show, let us know. Maybe we'll try and connect you with some other fans who are going to be in the house in your city. You can check out all the details at earhustlesq.com/tour. Once again, that's earhustlesq.com/tour. Let me tell you a story, a true story, about my first summer barbecue of the season. Memorial Day, 80 degrees, lovely weather, friends over at my house, I'm manning the grill. I get lots of compliments on the burgers I cooked, but the thing that 4 different people complimented me on, independent of one another, the blue polo shirt I was wearing. It is, in fact, an organic cotton silk polo, which I got for $50 on Quince. If you are gearing up for the summer, you are likely feeling that familiar urge to refresh your closet, but also not waste money on pieces that you'll only wear once or just for one season. Well, when you shop at Quince, you'll find clothes that are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It's luxury without the markup. And if my experience is any indication, you'll be getting nonstop compliments. How about that? Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. When you check in on the news each day, doesn't it kind of feel like every story is a head-spinning economic story? Tariffs, meme coins, budget fights, not to mention groceries and gas prices. Economics is everywhere, fueling our lives even where you least expect it. You're a This Day listener, which means I know you love context and hidden history. Well, Planet Money is the show for you. Planet Money recently did an episode that I absolutely loved, all about the more uncommon economic indicators being discussed on social media. Not just the obvious, like prices, but sales of lipstick are going up, babysitter buns are coming back into style. A show like Planet Money is built to dig into all the little ways that economics shapes our lives. Every episode of Planet Money is fun, illuminating, and pretty short, 20-ish minutes, and you'll walk away knowing a lot more about how the world really works. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR.
Yeah, and crossing the color line is going to have profound ramifications precisely because he is so visible, right? The idea that he can just get away with this publicly is something that white people in the U.S. aren't going to stand for. And this is where the Mann Act comes into play. So this is a federal law that gets passed in June of 1910, and it's part of all of these kind of vice laws that have been passed during the late 19th century and the progressive era. We've talked about like the Comstock laws, Society for the Prevention of Vice, all of these movements to try to clean up things like alcohol and prostitution.
And butter.
This is on the and butter, yes, unadulterated butter, big part of this. And this is part of that like anti-prostitution movement, but also anti something called white slavery. So there's this real panic at the time that young white women are being stolen away into prostitution. And so the Mann Act makes it a felony to cross state lines, transporting any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any other immoral purpose.
That's some nice specific language for you.
Yeah, I know.
Any other immoral purpose.
Just whatever is considered immoral. And that is a rich field for judges and juries to play in.
Yeah.
And it's because it is that kind of ambiguous language that it gets applied to everything. It gets applied to consensual relationships. It gets applied to premarital and extramarital relationships. And, of course, it gets applied to interracial relationships. And that's how this is policed. And Jack Johnson is, I would say, probably the most famous person arrested under the Mann Act. But
just on that point that it really is often used to go after miscegination. I mean, Kellie, can you just paint a quick picture of the larger fears around that in particular? In this area?
Gosh. I mean, that I don't think you could think of a more taboo racial issue than Black men and white women in particular. Because we know that the sexual assault of I hope we know that the sexual assault of white men against Black women is ever prevalent, but it's never discussed and never prosecuted. But when you think about the 1910s, again, we're talking about the height of lynching, 2 Black men being lynched per week. And a lot of this is over the allegations of sexual impropriety, the idea that, this white woman was raped, whether it was a consensual relationship or not. All of those ideas are pinned on Jack Johnson in a huge way. I mean, we think of him, society would see him as the sexual predator and for messing around with white girls. Right. And that is like their biggest fear is the purity of white women. Maintaining the purity of white women is at the core of so much of these debates. And so, when he is arrested for this, I mean, they throw the book at him, essentially.
Well, it seems like... So first off, before we continue, we should point out, I mean, from everything we can gather, Jack Johnson, had a bunch of women in his life at any point. A lot of these were very turbulent relationships. He also seemed to abuse a lot of women. I mean, he was not behaving
he was not a good man
admirably in this regard. But it also feels like they really kind of go on a fishing expedition and say, like, we have the Mann Act, let's go find a case that we can fit into it. And they kind of try a few of the different women that he has relationships with, and some of them sort of fall apart and some of them gain some ground. And it's not until kind of the second or third run at prosecuting him under the Mann Act that they finally, with this character, this district attorney, Harry A. Parkin, really kind of finds a woman that he can start to build this case around. And this is a woman by the name of Belle Schreiber, who had worked as a prostitute, had been one of Johnson's many lovers. Johnson also owned some juke joints, I guess, or bars and, so forth. But they finally kind of, with this particular relationship, are able to bring it to trial and find evidence of illegal, this is the FBI's words, evidence of illegal transportation by Johnson of women for an immoral purpose.
That's right. He had in October of 1910, assumed driven or ridden with Schreiber from Pittsburgh to Chicago, and they end up in a relationship. And so that's how they kind of get him for crossing state lines. This was just a few months after the Mann Act went into effect. But they go to court. And so it's a federal case. It's held at the Chicago Federal Building. And Schreiber, who's the woman who is at the center of the case, she's the chief witness for the prosecution. And it's a case heard by an all-white jury. It takes them an hour and 30 minutes or so to find Johnson guilty on all counts. And he's sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. Again, it's not a secret. It's not hidden why this case was prosecuted. Harry Parkin, who's the lead prosecutor, goes and tells reporters that this is an example of the dangers of miscegination. And he even goes on to say later to the Chicago Tribune, he's like, yeah, maybe we made an example out of this one guy. But as Parkin put it, it was his misfortune to be the foremost example of the evil in permitting the intermarriage of whites and blacks. Now he must bear the consequences.
But it has echoes of the guy who fought him, who was just like, yeah, I'm here to prove that white people are superior. This is a federal prosecutor basically laying it all out.
Yes, we're here to show you you're not. Here's how we smack you back down. Yeah. Like, we might not get you in the ring, but we're going to get you in the court. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens to him.
Yeah.
And then while it's on appeal, he takes off. He goes to Europe. He picks up the woman who would be his wife, Lucille Cameron. They go to Montreal, then they sail off to France. And he fights in a few different fights there, but, a war breaks out. And suddenly there's not much of a market for boxing matches.
I got to say, Kellie, going to Montreal and then going to France, that is the circuit, persecuted prominent black men, black people in this country. It's remarkable how often.
It is. It's actually, y'all know I'm writing this Titanic book. And for a long time, they said that Jack Johnson had tried to get on the Titanic, but he was denied access. Which is not true at all. He was not in France at the time.
The timing is off.
Yeah, the timing is off. But it's just interesting to me that he was in France. He does spend time in France. And, he does take a ship over to France to get there. But what's interesting to me, too, is that he could have stayed in France, but he tries to come back to the United States. And when he does, the Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, denies him a passport. Like, actually, don't come back. Yeah. We don't even want you. Not even to serve your sentence. We don't want you to come back. Yeah. And I think part of that too is because it's like, not just about serving his sentence, but they don't want a man like him back in the public imagination again, stirring up ideas about what could be possible.
Yeah. Throughout the 20s and 30s into the 40s, he does do some fighting here and there. He kind of sneaks back into the United States from time to time. He dies in 1946 at the age of 68. He and a friend were driving from New York to Texas. They visited a segregated diner, were refused service, got in the car, speeds away angrily, hits a telegraph pole. His car collides with a telegraph pole, and he dies in that car accident. Any other little codas to this story?
Can you make the argument that racism killed him? Because I think you can.
That's the final scene in the movie for sure, right?
Listen, he gets denied. I don't know. Who knows but they were not going to seat him and his friend in Texas. But who knows? If that's the reason why he's speeding off, then my goodness, he could not escape the snares of racism wherever he went. Yeah.
Well, it shaped his entire life.
Yeah.
Sure. The coda here is that President Trump pardons him in 2018.
Bananas. That's crazy bananas. Not that he shouldn't have been pardoned, not that he should have even ever been convicted, but why is Trump
clearly Trump watched the 8-hour Ken Burns documentary, then he went into the archives and did some research. He probably spoke to some descendants and did some real kind of soul searching and then came to this very difficult conclusion that he needed to pardon this
Part of his project of racial
Yes,
healing, Kellie.
Oh my God!
By
I
all
can't.
accounts, Sylvester Stallone, who is MAGA friendly, pals with Trump, got in Trump's ear, and Stallone is obsessed with the Jack Johnson story, and that's by all accounts how word got to Trump, and Trump said, "Sure, I'll do a favor to Sly Stallone and pardon this guy who I probably never have heard of or thought about."
But also, I kind of feel like posthumous pardons are kind of, I won't say meaningless, because maybe they do work for their family members and their descendants, but it doesn't do much for Jack Johnson.
Right.
No, and
you missed that.
and like if you do a pardon of that nature posthumously, like it makes it even more important that you kind of tell the story in an interesting, nuanced way and use it as a moment. And I don't think Trump didn't convene a conversation about Jack Johnson and this very complicated racialized story that took place, whatever. Anyway, last tidbit. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, his last name is a hat tip to Jack Johnson. His father was a professional wrestler and took on that name, Rocky Johnson, to honor Jack Johnson. So there you go. A little bit of the legacy.
That's a better coda.
All right. Well, go watch that Ken Burns documentary. It's really fascinating. But we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.